Hi, I'm Carrie Dodd, manager of the Tehama County Farm Bureau. Did you know walnuts harvested in Tehama County are exported all across the world each year? Join us today as we tour Lindauer River Ranch to learn about walnuts and their harvest process. Let's go on an ag venture.
My name is Michael Vasey, and I am a third-generation walnut and prune farmer here in Tehama County. We've been farming in this county for about 80 years. We grow both prunes and walnuts. Today, we're going to talk about how a walnut goes from being in my orchard and on my tree to the plate at your home. Let's talk a little bit about the history of the walnut. The walnut is believed to be the earliest food that people have eaten from trees. They have archaeological evidence that walnuts were being eaten 7,000 and 8,000 years ago. We believe the variety of walnut that we eat today came from Persia, and it didn't come to California until the late 1800s when the Franciscan friars and monks brought them to California and started planting them. Over the years, walnuts have really grown in the central part of California, and we are now the largest exporter of walnuts in the world. Walnuts do well here because of the mild Mediterranean climate. So they originated in that kind of climate, and they do really well where there's lots of sun, good deep soil, and where the winters aren't too cold. So there's a lot that you have to do in a walnut orchard before you're ready for harvest. First off, after planting the trees, it takes about 5 years until you're able to get a crop off the orchard. So that takes a lot of time. And then when you're not harvesting, there's a lot of things you have to be thinking about. Are the trees getting enough water? Are you spraying for pests? So we need to make sure that we don't get bugs in our nuts that ruin them. We have to worry about fungus and other things. During the winter time, we have to decide to prune the trees and how we want to prune the trees, because we want to make sure there's good sunlight in the orchard and that the tree itself stays healthy so it can last 35 or 40 years. When it gets really cold, we have to be careful that we don't get frost damage. And there's a few things you can do. You can make sure that your tree is hydrated so it doesn't have enough water before a frost. If it's real dry, you can get a lot of dead wood from the frost. We typically harvest our walnut trees in early October. Somewhere in a 2-week window from October 1st to October 15th. There are different kinds of varieties of walnuts. Some come a little sooner, some come a little later, and they all have different benefits. And there's probably 4 or 5 major varieties and many more that they're still testing and trying to see if they can make a better walnut. Some of the important things about growing walnuts is you really want a good sized walnut. Size makes a difference. If you grow small walnuts, you get paid less. The other thing that matters is the color of the actual meat in the walnut. The market really likes a light colored nut. So when we're harvesting, we have to be sure that we don't leave them in the field too long, we don't wait too long before we harvest, or leave them on the ground too long. All those things can lead the walnut to get darker, and then they're less valuable because people really want a light color. Okay, so some people may want to know, how do we know when an orchard is ready to be harvested? Well, first we look at the walnuts in the tree. As you can see, these walnuts, this is a hull. The green outer part of the walnut is a hull. And you can see when they're ready, the hull starts to split apart and then they just fall off. And so some of the nuts start to fall on the ground already. But when a farmer's looking at their orchard and trying to decide if they're ready, they want to make sure that that all the nuts are going to come out of the tree. Because if they're not ready, they're tight in there and they won't let go when you shake them. So you want to make sure you can get them out of the tree, but you also want to make sure that the hull is going to come off. So this one isn't split open yet. And so I'm thinking, well, you know, is this hull going to come off? Because we want to make sure the hull comes completely off the walnut. And so we come out here and we check them and we open it up and we say, well, is that going to come? Will that hull come off? And you see, that nut came off clean. So this is ready to be harvested. That will hull nicely. The first step in the harvest process is to shake the nuts from the tree. You can see a lot of the nuts fall naturally. The hulls open up when they're ready and they drop a lot of their nuts, but there's still a lot up in the tree. So we bring these machines around and we shake the tree to get all the nuts to fall on the ground. So that's what we're doing here. When shaking the trees, this equipment has special pads with lubricant in it because you don't want to damage the bark of the tree when you shake it. And so the pads are rubber, and there's a couple layers of rubber, and inside there's some silicone and water that gets injected in them to keep it from damaging the tree. The other thing that the shakers have is they have little sweepers in front of every tire, because when you're driving around out here, there's nuts all over the ground, and you don't want to drive over the walnuts and ruin them. So these little sweepers are in front of every tire, and whenever they go forward, those little sweepers move the nuts out of the way so they can drive around out here without ruining any walnuts. Once we've shaken all the walnuts on the ground, then we have to somehow get them together, and that's what a sweeper does. So a sweeper is just like the name implies. It's pulling nuts together into a row, a nice pile, and then on the other side it blows the nuts into another row. You're trying to get them out of the line of where the trees is so you can get them. And so what they're doing is trying to get these into a nice long row of walnuts so that they can be picked up effectively. Once we've done a couple passes on the sweeping, and it all depends on the width of your tree rows, you might have to make 2 passes or 3 passes. In this case, we've had sweepers go on either side of this row, and they're close to being in the middle, but they're not quite ready for the pickup machine yet. So they've got to make a 3rd pass with this sweeper to pull them all into one long row of walnuts, and we call that a windrow. So we also use some manual labor to move nuts around to get them out of places where we don't want to use the sweeper to pick them up. Sometimes they'll go in the orchard, they'll find a hole or something where there's some nuts, they'll pull them out. We just don't want to leave a lot of nuts in the orchard. We want to get them all into the truck. Yeah, so walnuts, once you shake them on the ground and you get them in the rows so we can pick them up, we don't want to leave them there because that's where the color in the nut can change and become less valuable. So usually within 24 hours, if not sooner, you're going to pick those walnuts up off the ground. Different things can happen in addition to the color changing. They could get mold if they're particularly wet, or they get rained on. They could mold inside, and that can be a huge issue if you have that kind of problem. So the timing of the different steps of the harvest are really important. Now that the nuts have been swept up from the ground after they've been shaken off the trees and are in these nice rows, we have the pickup machine coming. And the pickup machine is basically like a big vacuum, right? It sucks up all the nuts. It has some apparatus inside which spits out the leaves and the hulls and the sticks, and it's trying to get just down to the nuts and to put those in the car to be transferred to a truck. So this is where we load the nuts into the truck. So you can see we've got 2 trailers here. This one is already full, so we're loading into the second trailer. And this is the conveyor that takes the nuts from the cart into the truck. In just a minute, the truck will come, they'll dump their trailer up, and the conveyor will put them in the truck.
Thank you for joining us on our Ag Venture today. We hope you learned a lot at the Lindauer River Ranch about walnuts and walnut harvest. We hope to see you on our next Ag Venture.